It was Jean Piaget himself who described resemblances between children on the one side and, and premodern or archaic adults on the other side. Repeatedly in his writings, lasting from 1920 to 1980, he described in these 60 years in his writings and works those parallels. And he found these parallels or resemblances concerning every aspect of psychological life and world understanding, including logic, physics, social affairs, legal issues, moral issues, or religious phenomena. And he devoted even one complete monograph to the description of these parallels, namely in his book Psychogenèse et l'histoire des sciences, together with Rolando Garcia, published in 1983 and English 1989. But there were also some other authors who described these parallels. For example, Auguste Comte, the founder of sociology, or even every single classical author of psychoanalysis and developmental or child psychology, including Sigmund Freud, Carl Gustav Jung, Heinz Werner, and many others. And even some sociologists describe these parallels too. And Piagetian cross-cultural psychology developed over the past 100 years, researching the psychological life of archaic or premodern or traditional people around the world, found in remote areas or in some cultures, remote cultures, or some underprivileged social milieus, patterns in the mind of adults, typical usually for children in the West. And Piagetian cross-cultural psychology could therefore describe that the final stage of adults in premodern or traditional or underprivileged milieus is the pre-operational or the concrete operational stage that is the second or the third stage of human development. But those archaic or traditional adults do not develop the adolescent stage of formal operations, typical for humans in modern industrialized societies, unfolding between the 12th and the 20th year of life. And that means when the adolescent stage of formal operations does not develop, that's the final stage of premodern or archaic adults is more or less the 10th developmental year or even below. That could be the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, or the 9th year of life, could be the last year of human development in the minds of premodern or archaic people. And when humans of modern societies develop the adolescent stage of formal operations, then this includes that their developmental year is the 12th, the 13th, the 15th, the 18th, or the 20th year of life. So modern adults stop their development during their youth, while archaic or premodern adults stop their development during their childhood. And we call this phenomenon arrested development due to closed developmental windows, while the open developmental windows existing in modern cultures due to special socialization background enables people to develop the adolescent stage of formal operations, and that means developmental stages, developmental ages of humans ranging from the 12th to the 20th year of life. And that explains why everything what developmental psychology has described or has found out to describe children is also the main pattern of adult or premodern humans. Everything what child or developmental psychology has found out to describe the core patterns of children is to find in the mind of premodern adults. For example, everything that Jean Piaget has described in his early books concerning the psychology of children, every single detail is to find in the mind of premodern or archaic people when we base our judgment and our knowledge on that what ethnology or the historical disciplines have found out to describe premodern adults. I take one example. Children very young do not discriminate inanimate objects, dead matter, artifacts, and inanimate objects such as stones, rocks, waters, winds, clouds, stars, and so on. They do not discriminate these inanimate objects from animate, living, and conscious entities such as persons, animals, or living beings generally. And that means they assign consciousness and life, even personality, reason and mind, to clouds, winds, waters, rocks and stones, and even artifacts. And this tendency is very strong in the mind of the preschool child aged 3, 4, 5, or 6 years. And then it declines and diminishes, and it is vanished when the child is about 10 years of life. That means animism is very strong in the child very young, and then it declines. And it declines and diminishes only in human beings living in modern industrial society. And that is what child or developmental psychology has found over the past 150 years. And that means developmental psychology is the tool, is a discipline to explain existence and disappearance of animism. When animism is vanished and abolished, that means that the mind behind must be more developed than that of a child below its 10 years of life. So, developmental psychology explains the existence of animism, and it explains its disappearance. The single cause to disappearance is the rise of the adolescent stage of formal operations, and that is developmental ages of humans beyond the 10th year of life. Modern humans in modern industrialized societies, ranging their developmental age between the 10th and the 20th year of life, these people do not have animistic schemes and animistic patterns. And therefore we know the conditions under which animism disappears. It is the adolescent stage of formal operations. So, and this explains why animism is strong in every single archaic or premodern society. And it explains also why animism does not exist anymore in the mental life of human beings living under modern industrialized conditions. We know from every single archaic or premodern society that these people, without any exception, take it for granted that stones, waters, winds, rocks, clouds, and artifacts are alive and conscious. And that is the reason why they personify these entities and adore them even as gods. They talk to them and ask for their help. They give food to them and pray to them and ask them for assistance concerning all struggles in life, concerning all problems people have in their lives. And they can adore these actually inanimate phenomena only then when they take it for granted that they are conscious and alive. And that is consequently the case, as we can see from the consequences of these animistic schemes in the mind of people. But we have also the testimony of Piagetian cross-cultural psychology, because the surveys conducted by Piagetian cross-cultural psychology also showed that the usual tests applied to children demonstrate that premodern adults adhere to those animistic schemes they had already in their childhood. And so, developmental psychology on the one hand and ethnology on the other hand get the same conclusions. These people really think that clouds, winds, rocks and stones can think, can reason, and participate at human society, and that they have the status of being gods. And that explains why even Aristotle thinks of an arrow that it flies through the air because of its own will, and that the surrounding air participates at the movement of the arrow as making deliberately space for the arrow and turn around the arrow to push him forward, to push it forward. And even Aristotle thinks that trees are moving in the wind by its own power and will, producing thereby a wind that supports the movement of the tree, a phenomenon called antiperistasis. And that belief is to find in the mind of every single child, as Piaget had found out and described, for example, in his book La causalité physique chez l'enfant, and in a special article about the theory of movement written in 1960. 67. If we only knew from premodern people their animistic views on nature, this would suffice beyond the slightest doubt that these people stood on the anthropological stage of children and that they did not develop beyond the 10th developmental year. This would be enough. It is a full proof of the full identity between children and premodern adults concerning their psychological structures. And if we only knew from modern industrialized peoples their denial of animism and their adherence to empirical causality and the mechanical worldview, if we only knew from modern people their discrimination between animate and inanimate phenomena, this would suffice beyond the slightest doubt that these modern people stay on the adolescent stage of formal operations and that their anthropological stages and ages are beyond the 10th developmental year. The same can we tell from the belief in magic in the child. Every single child has strong magical belief and practices. Children take it for granted that magic rules the world. Children take it for granted that their parents master their lives and the world by magical powers. Every single child sees already the electricity, the light in the rooms as made by magic when the child is very young. So, without any doubt, it is absolutely clear that culture and socialization does not arouse magical beliefs in the child, as socialization theory might assume. It is instead the developmental stage of the child that explains the magical belief in the mind of the child. It is only the anthropological stage of the child that explains the existence of magical belief in the child. And the magical belief in the child is the stronger, the younger the child is. Children aged 3, 4, 5 are the strongest believers in magic. And then it declines. Children aged 7, 8, 9 have much weaker beliefs in magic as a child very young. But this is a phenomenon, this phenomenon of decline of magic, this is to find only in modern industrialized societies. Because in every other society, in premodern or traditional or archaic society, magic does not decline. It remains constant throughout the whole life of people. Modern adolescents have surmounted and abolished the belief in magic. Magic declines according to the observations of Jean Piaget with about 9 years of life, and then it vanishes. That means the pre-operational stage of the child is a single cause to the existence of magic, and the concrete operational stage is already a stage where magic declines. And magic vanishes and disappears completely during the adolescent stage of formal operations. That means the sole existence to the phenomenon of magic is the child's psychology. And the psychology of teenagers and adolescents is a single cause to the disappearance of magic. And so we see that there is now premodern or traditional culture without a very strong belief in magic. We can take every continent we want, we can select every culture we want. Everywhere you find the strong belief in magic in every pre-industrialized society. And even the intellectuals, and even the intellectual and scientific elite of pre-modern societies believe in magic too. And that explains why we find the belief in witchcraft and sorcery in every pre-modern culture. Witchcraft and sorcery is not a phenomenon solely bound to medieval Europe, as some people seem to believe. Witchcraft and sorcery is a phenomenon you find among Australian Aborigines. You find in Black Africa till today. You find in pre-Columbian America. You find in Europe from Stone Ages to the advent of modern society. You find the belief in witchcraft and sorcery in entire Asia. And it has consequences, because you can see the consequences. When sorcerers and witches are prosecuted and punished to death, or when people really believe that every single misfortune they have in their life are made by witches and sorcerers. But also phenomena such as shamanism or the magic of the kings or the cosmogonic rites are made by magic. Magic pervades and penetrates the entire cultural atmosphere of every pre-modern society. Or take, for example, the culture of the Dobo Melanesians. Radcliffe Brown, no, it was not Radcliffe Brown, it was Fortune, who described in his book about the Dobo Melanesians, a book from the early 30s of the past century. He described in his book that the Dobo Melanesians go to work for many years to raise the money to purchase magical spells and charms from their neighbors or for some people, to have the opportunity to apply them. For example, they work some years on plantations or in gardens or as fishermen to raise the money to buy a charm to produce food, or to have luck during fishing, or to have luck in love affairs also. Or they go on hunting and robbery and contort people by their weapons to hand over their charms. They do not make robbery for get some diamonds or some money, but they contort charms as a typical behavior in Dobo Melanesia. And that shows that their strong in magic was that their belief in magic was very strong. In a way, we can't even imagine. And when some ethnologists or social scientists say that the belief in magic is still existent in modern industrial society, they don't know what they are talking about. This kind and this strength of belief in magic is to find in hospitals, among handicapped people suffering from psychosis or schizophrenia or so, but not among normal people living in modern industrialized societies. This kind of belief is vanished in Europe for centuries. And so we see that developmental psychology is a single cause to the explanation. No, it's a single cause to the disappearance of magic in modern society. The first big wave of extinction was in the 14th century when the classical ordeals were abrogated. And the second wave of extinction was in the 18th century during the Age of Enlightenment, when magical practices became obscure and became doubtful and were declined and denied by people. The Age of Enlightenment was a very severe strike to the existence of magic in Europe. And the 19th century sees the abrogation of belief in magic in Europe. And from that culture, from that center of the world, spread the light of rationality and the wave of making the belief in magic outdated. So, whenever people surmount the 10th year of life, whenever people develop the adolescent stage of formal operations, develop developmental ages of humans of their 12th, 15th, or 18th year, then magic will automatically evade. And that shows if we only knew from ancient people their belief in magic, this would suffice to demonstrate beyond the slightest doubt that these people stood on anthropological stages of children, and that they did not develop the 10th or the 12th developmental year. We don't have to know more than this. And I have demonstrated now two phenomena with the same power, with the same strength, that demonstrate beyond the slightest doubt that premodern or traditional peoples stood on the pre-operational stage, or perhaps partially on the concrete operational stage, but they did not develop the adolescent stage of formal operations. That is absolutely clear. But we can take, for example, some more phenomena to demonstrate this identity and the clarity of the equation. Let's take, for example, the belief in metamorphosis. The belief in metamorphosis is a typical phenomenon in the mind of the child aged 3, 4, and 5. Children this age do believe that a rabbit can transform into a cat, or that a rock can transform into a specter, or that a human being can transform into a tree or so. That is typical for the child aged 3, 4, 5. When children in modern society develop the 6th year of life, this belief in strong metamorphosis disappears. And we know from premodern societies that adults typically believe that human beings can transform to lions, can transform to crocodiles within a second, made by magic. Not as a consequence of a long procedure, but within a second, made by magic, a human being can transform into a plant, into a rock, or whatever. That is a strong belief in metamorphosis, viewable, observable in every premodern society as a typical phenomenon of worldview. Or let's take another example. The children by their 10th year of life do not master syllogisms. They do not understand syllogisms like all bears in Russia are born, Moscow lies in Russia. What color have the bears in Moscow? Children by their 8th or by their 10th year of life do not understand this kind of logic. They cannot respond to this question. And they say typically, I don't know this, I was not there. And Piagetian cross-cultural psychology and the Russian psychology showed that archaic, traditional or premodern people do not understand syllogisms too, and for the same reasons. So nature peoples living in jungles or living in deserts, in remote areas, will not know even one single adult to respond to this syllogism. And we can expect, as we know from Piagetian cross-cultural psychology, that traditional people living in the 20th century in Africa, Asia, or elsewhere, or in Indian America, we know from these tests that about 80% of these people do not master syllogisms for the same reasons. And therefore we can expect that in medieval times, 80, 90, 95% of people would not find an answer to that test procedure. And that shows that forms of logic, typical for the adolescent stage of formal operations, were usually absent in the mind of premodern people. And that the forms of logic premodern adults had mastered resembled to those forms of logic we find in the pre-operational or perhaps in the concrete operational child. So we can add one detail after another. And child psychology has not collected 100 tests or 100 phenomena to describe the psychology of the child. It has found thousands of patterns typical for the child and absent in the mind of modern adults. And every single of these thousands of phenomena, typical for the mentality of the child, is also the main pattern of pre-modern adults living in traditional or archaic societies. There is not any gap. There is not any exception. there's a full identity of the psychology of the child and the psychology of archaic or premodern adults. But we have now some commentaries to make. The first is, it is clear that premodern adults master their lives and that they have knowledge and tactics children do not have. But these are forms of knowledge and techniques that must fall into the range of the pre-operational stage or the concrete operational stage. That means pre-modern adults cannot gain knowledge and cannot master techniques that require the existence of the adolescent stage of formal operations. However, they have techniques and knowledge children do not have. Preschool children are not able to tie their shoes often, or they cannot prepare their own dishes. But pre-modern adults can not only tie their shoes and prepare their food, they can much, much more. They can navigate boats on rivers and lakes and oceans. They are good at hunting and in agriculture. They can build houses and even temples. And they can make their clothes and so on. They can make the fine arts to a special stage and so on. But whatever they can do and are able to do, it must fall into ranges typical for developmental ages below the 10th year of life. And this difference between psychological stage and knowledge is named as difference between qualitative and quantitative development. So children and premodern adults share their qualitative development, but not their quantitative one. When we want to understand why premodern adults do not develop beyond the 10th developmental year, we have to refer to the concepts developmental window and arrested development, main concepts of psychology and anthropology in the end of the 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century. Arrested development means that adults do not develop beyond the 10th year of life, do not develop beyond the 7th year of life, do not develop beyond the 12th year of life. That means arrested development. Because we see that the full identity of the pre-modern worldview and mental system on the one hand, and the pre-operational stage or the concrete operational stage on the other hand, implies by itself that development must be arrested and that pre-modern adults do not have the opportunity to climb on higher stages later in their lives. We have not a single example that any culture, that any pre-modern culture, or that any social group of pre-modern adults have ever developed the adolescent stage of formal operations later in their lives, when they were 30, 40, 50, or 60 years. That is not the case and we have not a single example of such a development, and that is explainable only by the concept of arrested development. And the phenomenon of arrested development results from unused developmental windows in early childhood. When open developmental windows in early childhood are not used, then the development will close in an early age of life. And this phenomena lead to a special theory, namely to my theory of the structural genetic theory program. My theory of the structural genetic theory program draws the conclusions of these data won by Piagetian cross-cultural psychology and supported by all data we have from ethnology and from some historical disciplines. And that means that this is a most fundamental description of the psychological life of people living in history. When we want to understand premodern people, we have to refer to these data. We have to refer to Piagetian stage theory. Piagetian stage theory delivers the most fundamental description of people having lived in world history, having lived in societies around the world in the pre-modern area, and Piagetian stage theory delivers the most fundamental description of modern people living in industrialized societies. And therefore, my theory, which has done the most to describe this phenomena, is the most important and the most relevant offspring of Piagetian theory. Not the neo-Piagetian theories, but my theory of the structural genetic theory program is the most prominent and the most important offspring of Piagetian theory. It delivers the most fundamental description of human beings in history. It delivers the most fundamental theory of the human being as he or she has lived in history. And it delivers the most fundamental theory of the human and social disciplines, because it is impossible to understand the history of humans without the application of this theory, and it is impossible to understand the history of law, politics, religion, culture, morals, manners, worldview, sciences and philosophy, arts, without this theory of psychogenesis. So it delivers not only the most fundamental anthropology, the most fundamental theory of the human being, it delivers also the most fundamental theory of history. And with this, the most fundamental theory of the rise of modern industrial society. And I see here a parallel to the role of evolutionary theory in biology and to relativity theory and quantum mechanics to physics. And it was James George Fraser who said in 1927 that in later times it will be possible to explain the patterns of the primitive reason and minds by the application of child or developmental psychology, and that the Darwins and the Newtons of the social sciences will arise at that point when this will be feasible. And Hermann Schneider the Orientalist and Egyptologist, said even in 1909 the same, that it will be possible to base the social and human disciplines on the scaffolds of child or developmental psychology in later times, and that will be the time of the Darwins and Newtons of the human and social disciplines. And it is clear that in his head, Piaget had the idea by himself, but he did not dare to go all the steps necessary. He went only some steps in the right direction and stopped then, due to his descriptions of the parallels between premodern philosophy, premodern sciences on the one hand, and children's philosophy and children's minds on the other hand. Despite his monograph, Psychogenèse et l'histoire des sciences, he remained insecure how to do the work. And that is what I have done in the past 40 years with 14 books and 122 articles, including 88 journal articles, to evidence beyond the slightest doubt that the most important theory ever developed in the history of sciences, in the history of the social and human sciences, is given when you look upon history through the glasses provided by developmental psychology. If you recognize and understand that premodern adults do not develop beyond the 10th developmental year on a common and usual manner, and that the psychogenetic advancement of modern humankind has unfolded stepwise and subsequently from generation to generation in the past 300 years, or in the past 300 years.